At the time of the global military conflict known as World War II, everything was made global. The people, the battles, the territories where the fighting took place, the number of lethal weapons, in short, truly everything. But also genuinely immeasurable was the brutality on the part of the invader. Nazi ideology awakened a real animal cruelty with which they attacked both military opponents and civilians. For the first time in human history, the idea of the total annihilation of nations was carried out with such sophistication and methodicality. Entire Nazi military units were noted for their grandiose mop-ups. The tank, cavalry and infantry divisions, with names that later became household names, were the true Horsemen of Death, bringing only pain, suffering, and insane level of fear. Let's talk about Deadhead Tank Division. This unit began its history back in 1933. The ideological inspirer was Theodor Eicke, who was one of Himmler's main advisors. In the beginning, the division was created as a security structure for the concentration camps, but that was not enough for Eicke. A fanatically convinced Nazi recruited into his new structure the same kind of completely impassive, emotionless human machines, who were devoid of any human feelings. Himmler realized that he had gradually raised a real monster that sooner or later would demand blood, and soon that opportunity presented itself. In 1940, the Nazis completely defeated the French, but despite the fact that they surrendered, the Nazi monsters never missed a chance to kill somebody on their way. Near Le Paradis, there was a skirmish between the British legionnaires and the Deadhead Tank Division. The British fought valiantly, but the Nazis had much more people and weapons. The British were forced to surrender and by all the rules informed the enemy. The Nazis promised that nothing would happen to them, but as soon as the unarmed British came out of the hiding, they were immediately shot at point-blank range with machine guns. And those who were not killed immediately were killed with bayonets. According to military law, this was a real war crime, but the division commanders were not even reprimanded. Inspired by their impunity, they continued in the same vein on Soviet territory. They especially distinguished themselves in 1943 near Kharkov, where they carried out mass executions and completely destroyed a Soviet hospital with the wounded people there. The final defeat of the Deadhead occurred in 1945 near the Mauthausen concentration camp. The leaders of this division were captured and condemned. The Florian Geyer Cavalrymen. The division, named after a medieval German knight, was formed in the summer of 1942 and was initially conceived as a military unit of the highest caliber, specially formed to fight the Bast units of the Red Army and partisan units. The Führer himself had humongous hopes for this unit. This is evidenced at least by the fact that the Directorate included very important military personnel, including Brigadenführer Hermann Fegelein, the husband of Eva Braun's sister. But the Knights of the Wehrmacht soon realized that it was much safer to fight civilians than soldiers. Therefore, their main activity was connected precisely with the ravaging of settlements, along the way completely destroying people. Therefore, we can say that it was already a punitive unit. The Nazis especially showed themselves in Belarus. According to the documents of that time, only for 1 July of 1942, the division destroyed about 100 villages and over 1,200 people were killed. However, by 1943, the Allies succeeded in knocking out the SS and the division was transferred to Hungary. There it met its ignominious end in the winter of 1944-1945. Caught in a cauldron near Budapest, the unit was almost completely destroyed. Its leader at the time, Joachim Römer, committed suicide to avoid capture. Latvian Legion. When describing the brutalities that the Nazis allowed themselves to carry out on occupied territories, however, we should not forget that the Nazis had quite a few followers who adopted the Nazi ideology and were no less brutal than the Nazis were. This is particularly true when it comes to the infamous Latvian Legion. The most gruesome crime was the punitive operation in Belarus in 1943, which had been touchingly named Winter Magic. The essence of the maneuver was to completely clear the Belarusian land of partisans. At the same time, way more civilians were killed who refused to cooperate with the bastards. The sadists' favorite form of execution was mass burning. Whole families were driven into houses, which were then set on fire on all sides. Most of the people died suffocating from the smoke, and those who managed to escape were immediately bayoneted to death by the vigilant punishers. During this operation alone, several thousand people were tortured and killed, and hundreds of settlements were wiped off the face of the earth, and over 15,000 people were sent to concentration camps. In addition to its crimes in the territories of the Soviet Union, the Legion also made its mark in a number of other occupied countries, notably Poland. With absolutely no pity in their hearts, the legionaries massacred adults, old men, and children alike with equal cruelty. This continued until the end of the war, when with the fall of the Reich, this terrible unit was liquidated as well. Thousands of soldiers who had been part of the Legion did receive their retribution and were sentenced to various terms for their war crimes. 36th SS Division Dirlewanger. Look, if we talk about the military units of the Wehrmacht in terms of finding the greatest number of marginals and lowlifes among them, then the 36th SS Division Dirlewanger certainly comes to mind. Not only was it composed entirely of criminals and murderers, but at its head was Oskar Dirlewanger, after whom the division was named, who was a pedophile and who abused an 8-year-old girl. But faithful service to a cruel and inhumane ideology can wash away in their eyes all crimes. In any normal state, such monsters would not be allowed to serve in the military, but back then it was one of the most privileged units. The division participated in the suppression of the uprising in Poland, which in fact turned out to be a common terror directed against the civilian population. As a result, the unit tortured to death several thousand people, and among them about 600 children. And the psychopathic pedophile Dirlewanger was awarded one of the highest awards of the Third Reich, the Iron Cross. This division was defeated in April of 1945 in Silesia. Oskar Dirlewanger himself was taken prisoner by the Poles, who were finally able to take out their long-nurtured anger on him. The commander of the 36th Division was beaten regularly for a month until he died. Subscribe for more videos.